Buonasera, benvenuti.
Good afternoon and welcome to this session 3 dedicated to refugees and migrants.
That is a very hot issue of global migration. The title of this panel will be G20, a G20 imperative, support refugees and forced migrants. Let me greet you all. My name is Paolo Naso. I am professor of political science at the University of Rome. At the same time, I belong to a Christian community, a Protestant community, the Waldensian Church, that in cooperation with other bodies, and namely the community of Sant'Egidio, have been among the starters of the best practice of the humanitarian corridors. I don't go in details because I'm sure that my friend and colleague Marco Impagliazzo will detail the experience we have been carrying out in the last 6 years. I am here with a co-chair that I'm very happy to introduce you, is Christina Tobias Nall of the Islamic Relief USA, and hoping that this will be a very fruitful session, I will give her the floor in a few seconds. I want to remind that unfortunately we have a very limited time. We have to close the panel around 4:30. So all the speakers are warmly invited not to exceed the 8 minutes for each presentation so that we will have time for a public conversation about the issues, and possibly we will have the opportunity to listen our speakers offering answers and reactions. So thank you very much for choosing this panel, and the word to Christina. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Naso. So I would also like to make some introductory remarks, and we have been informed at least one of our speakers will not be here, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, it allows us more time to be interactive, I hope, at the end. And on behalf of the Interfaith G20 Working Group on Refugees, for which I am the liaison, I do also want to warmly welcome you to our session today. If you have not had the occasion to check out the website, each of the working groups of the Interfaith G20 put together some proposed recommendations to the G20 in the form of short briefs, and those are available on the website, and we do hope you'll take a look at those. And specifically for this one, obviously, as is mentioned in the title, we're talking about refugees, IDPs, internally displaced peoples, all sorts of people on the move, migrants. And we know some of the challenges, and these are included in our recommendations, around migratory routes that are very unsafe, social cohesion, and problems that arise when they arrive in these countries. And we are going to have our panelists speak on these and other topics today. We have very diverse geographical representation from the Middle East, South America, Caribbean area, and Europe as well. And I can give, if we have time at the end, a bit of brief experience about what is happening currently in the United States. Our current refugee crisis, as you know, is obviously with the Afghanis. My own organization, we're working very closely with the U.S. administration in terms of giving consultation on cultural, religious, and linguistic competencies to the various refugee resettlement agencies. Now, we do want to give our speakers time, but I wanted to, if you'll indulge me, start with one short story. So this is a mask. You're all quite familiar. You're all wearing them today. In April 2020, in the United States, it was right when the pandemic was starting to happen, when health guidance was becoming available about masking. And there was a group of people in the Washington, D.C. area that had an ingenious idea, because there were a number of African refugee families already there, and they did not have any livelihood, they did not have any income, but they had time and they had talent. And so this group of people donated a lot of material to these women in these Afghan families, and they became a cohort together, and they created the Refugee Mask Making Group. And they made these beautiful masks. Now, this particular family, I got very close to the family that made the masks for my family, and I never did get to hear their story of origin and how they came. But I have met and encountered many Afghani refugee families along the migratory routes. Islamic Relief has one of our programs in Lesvos, Greece, and the only reason I will highlight this is a very interesting interfaith collaboration. It is housed with HIAS, which is a Jewish refugee agency. So it is a Jewish and a Muslim NGOs working together, giving service delivery, psychosocial support, pro bono legal aid, and all of our staff on the ground are Christian Orthodox lawyers of Greek origin. So it's an amazing story of how faiths and faith NGOs can come together to serve these very vulnerable communities. So I have a lot more I could say, but I don't want to take the time today. At this moment, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is from Lebanon. And Eli El-Hindi, I know that you have a presentation, so if you would like to step up, or remarks that you would like to make, if you would like to step up to the podium. He is the director of the Adian Foundation.
Thank you. Let me start by thanking Professor Meloni and the organizers of the Interfaith 20 for their invitation and for the privilege of speaking to you tonight. Unfortunately, refugees' issues are increasing rather than decreasing with time. We need to reflect on that. We need to think about why are humans becoming more aggressive, more attached to their identities, less willing to compromise, less willing to find common grounds and accept the other. Religious, ethnic, and cultural diversity of the world we are living in is a major reason for this failure. Or to be clearer, it is how we deal with this diversity that is the problem. I tend to agree with the theory that says the world have dismissed identity and identity politics way too early. We thought that an extreme or sometimes forced secularism would be the best antidote to religious extremism. We thought that globalization is the best way to unite people around the world. As a Catholic from the Middle East, I tend to disagree with these premises. Secularism that is aggressively excluding or at least neglecting religious and other identities and identity politics is doomed to implode and cause reactions. A globalized world does not solve identity causes or identity-caused conflicts. It simply makes them international and makes their spillover much further reaching. As a result, refugees' issues have gained a much bigger influence on the world scene and can no longer be considered a local or even a regional problem. Solutions based on human rights and equal dignity of all human beings are definitely the essence and the basis of every potential solution. Yet, for the discussion today, I argue it is far from being enough. Any solution that aims at successfully addressing the issue of refugees needs to take into consideration and maybe even be based on the respect of religious and other identities, on the transformation, on transforming these from a reason of the conflict to a partner and a tool for the solution. This logic applies on both sides of the problem, home countries and host countries. Home countries where conflicts are, according to some statistics, up to 80% based on identity differences. Home countries where conflicts are perennial, inherent, and consistent. And also, on the other hand, in host countries that are facing the ethical and political dilemma of receiving huge numbers of refugees, and the big debate that this acceptance of the uncontrolled flow of refugees is actually changing or even challenging the identity of these host countries in a way that is unacceptable and dangerous. The political discourse based on neglecting and overcoming differences have in fact led to a rise of extremism and countered by a counter-extremism, feeding on the existence and the strength of each other, feeding on xenophobia and victimization. We at Adyan Foundation are convinced, are arguing, and are working on presenting inclusive citizenship, or rather inclusive citizenry, as a better approach. The inclusive citizenship approach moves the discussion from the level of reaction to the crisis to the level of long-term solutions. Inclusive citizenship is the best way to address the issue of refugees at its roots in home countries. It invites local, regional, and international actors to stop promoting a forced nation statehood based on religion or ethnicity, and to stop, on the other hand, promoting secular statehood as a magic solution. Because we know and we have experienced that both these are not feasible nor present solutions to countries. For example, the essence of the problem in several Arab countries was with the identification of the state as an Arab Muslim state, rather Sunni even. Country legislation, heads of states, different things were limited by this definition. And this automatically excludes those who are not Arab or those who are not Muslim, and even worse, those who are neither. Such a conflict can only be solved and sustainable peace can only be achieved through the establishment of inclusive citizenship that recognizes and accepts the existing identities, religious, ethnic, and other, and does not oppress or disregard them. Inclusive citizenship is also the best way to address the issue of refugees in host communities. That feel their identity is being threatened by the large number of refugees. In fact, if we look at these host societies, like for example European countries, we realize that societies are far from being nation states, and that migration over the years have completely changed the way they identify themselves and their state. For example, a look at the French or British football team, or even their parliament, would show us how different is today's society from what was imagined or romanticized about. It is absurd to talk today about the French nation or the Christian heritage of Britain, for example, among other examples. Promoting inclusive citizenship in these countries argues for a set of values, norms, and traditions that make each of these countries unique without labeling it exclusive identity definitions, and allows for any newcomers, migrant or forced migrants or refugees, to identify with this set of values, with these norms, with these traditions that make the country what it is without having to drop or let go of the identity they bring with them and believe in. Inclusive citizenship does not promote a state without identity, but a state with a pluralistic identity that includes the variety of identities that exist in it, and instead of oppressing these, encourages and protects them and looks at the diversity as a resource, as an added value, as richness. The Unity in Diversity EU slogan is not and cannot be exclusive to the people who were there before a certain time, and cannot be discriminatory. On the other hand, diverse communities around the world must build pluralistic states that include all their indigenous populations, who, by the way, may not have chosen to be part of this or that state, but simply found themselves there because of the results of colonial policies and interests. To conclude, where is religion and religious institutions and faith-based actors in all of that? We have realized in the past 2 decades that we are far from overcoming religions. And in my opinion, we should not even try to. We have seen that millions of believers around the world still hold on tight to their religious identity and belongings, and still see for themselves as individuals and institutions playing a major role in the public sphere, in public affairs, and in public issues, completely rejecting the theory that faith is a private matter that should not play a role in the common civic space. Yet, we have seen the huge power of the faithful be used as a power for destruction in many places and as a power of building bridges and human fraternity in many other. In fact, most of the time we see in the same space people of the same faith who cause damage and kill in the name of God, while others from the same faith in the same space work hard for peace and development and the preservation of the dignity of human beings, any human being. We have indeed seen faith-based actors strongly engaged on the issues of refugees to promote inclusion, protection, alleviation of pain, and solving conflicts that are the root cause of the refugee crisis, and are also the results of it, trying to break that vicious cycle both in the home and in host countries. Thus, we have a choice. The G20 has a choice. Rather, I would say they have a duty and a responsibility to partner, empower, and build on the faith-based activism that strives for peace, mutual respect, and inclusive citizenship. In addition to the theological dialogue that are increasingly happening, a more urgent dialogue is needed, an interfaith dialogue for life and for reconciliation, a dialogue that happens in refugees camps, in the poor suburbs of our cities, behind the scenes of battlefronts, and on peace negotiation tables, in soup kitchens, feeding the poor, in the efforts of religious leaders from different religious communities working together to address the social, economic, and ethical challenges of their communities. G20 must support the efforts of rehumanizing religion to empower alternative narratives, to promote interfaith initiatives, and to support faith-based actors for peace and reconciliation. This is, in my opinion, an imperative that must be included in the G20 address of the refugee crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eli, for this powerful presentation. Thank you for introducing us the concept of the inclusive citizenship. And I think that we can, from the very beginning of this panel, agree about the necessity of a strong religious recognition, of strong recognition of the importance of the religious identities in a model of inclusive citizenship. I think that the idea that the G20 can play a major role in creating platform for a more practical interfaith dialogue is a very good suggestion, and I do hope that it will be possible to present this conclusion to the organizer of this meeting. Introducing the second speaker, I want to remind all of you the title of our panel, that is G20 Imperative. I would like to add an adjective, a moral imperative. And I say moral because it's a matter of fact that the faith-based community have been playing in the decades a major role in supporting the rights of the refugees. And they probably did this because of their spiritual, theological background, in the spirit that all the people are entitled a dignity because all the person are created at the image of God. This revolutionary idea created the legal basis for important constitutions recognizing the rights of all the person despite the ethnic, religious, and gender differences. So I think that the faith-based communities on these specific issues have been really playing a very important role that we want to claim and to be recognized. In this spirit, I invited the second speaker, that is Professor Marco Impagliazzo, President of the Community of Sant'Egidio. And as I mentioned, the Community of Sant'Egidio with some other Protestant institutions have been the major actor of the experience of the humanitarian corridors as one of the best practice to grant safe passages and a proper process of integration to thousands of migrants in Europe. Professor, the floor is yours.
Buonasera, parlerò in italiano.
Good afternoon. I'm going to speak Italian.
I would like to thank the chair. The chair is a dear friend of mine. Thank you, Paolo Naso. Together with Paolo Naso and his community, we shared the best practice of humanitarian corridors. So we were supported by the ministers for immigration in Italy, basically the Home Affairs Minister in Italy, and the head of the civil liberties, the prefect Di Bari, is here with us, and he has been one of the main partners to put these best practice into practice. And I would like to thank even the person in charge of international cooperation. Paolo Naso said this is a moral imperative, and it's true. As a European citizen, as our co-chair said, our experiences are from all over the world. So as a European citizen, I can tell you that in Europe, there are not legal channels in order to face migration. And this is patent if you consider the negative effects of migration, people dying at sea. Pope Francis said that the Mediterranean Sea is the greatest graveyard of Europe. And this is true. What is happening at the European borders in Bosnia or in Balkan countries, and what is happening on Canary Islands, and what is happening in Spain, well, all these aspects are part of a great tragedy. Humanitarian corridors are the result of a revolution. Evangelical and Roman Catholic communities, like the Egidio community and the Federation of Evangelical Churches, decided to join together in order to do something to fight against such tragedies. We found a tool, we found a legal tool. This is an important tool. It's called Visti Decree, and it's a part of the Schengen Treaty. Thanks to this decree, if there are humanitarian reasons for that, and if there are people who are not considered as refugees and are weak, well, such people can receive a visa for a limited period of time and with some restrictions. What does it mean? Italy was the first country to make these commitment. So I would like to underline the importance of the Italian role, and this model is now popular in France, in Belgium, in Andorra, in San Marino. Pope Francis, when he traveled to the island of Lesbos, thanks to the Egidio community, well, he was able to take some refugees from Lesbos to Italy, thanks to a humanitarian corridor. So Italy was the first country to introduce humanitarian corridors and visa with special restrictions. So these visas are for people who are not considered as refugees yet, and once they are considered as refugees, they are free to move. So they don't need these visa limited by territoriality anymore. This has involved many communities. This is a meeting on interfaith. Such visa involved many communities, and these communities decided to bear all the costs for saving such people. So far, 3,600 people from Lebanon, Syria, or Ethiopia have benefited from such a visa. And recently we have signed another agreement with the Home Affairs Ministry. So the Italian government is now bearing all the costs of humanitarian corridors in order to save all those refugees staying in detention camps in Libya. And we are all aware of the living conditions of such camps. This system involves communities. We could say that this is a great sponsorship, so communities bear all the economic costs of such system, and they are in charge of welcoming all these people. They want to do the best to integrate such people. So humanitarian corridors combine welcoming people with their integration. Communities welcome such people and they bear all the costs for that. They also work hard to integrate those people. They welcome them in their parishes, in their families, in their local villages, etc. So these people were able to integrate into those places where they were welcomed. Some other people decided to travel abroad to reconnect with their families of origin. This model is one of the most innovative ones. It's one of the most European innovative systems, and it's a legal tool to save immigrants. We are asking Europe, and we're using this meeting to do that, we are asking Europe to generalize this practice, the practice of humanitarian corridors. They are promoted by NGOs, governments, and we want them to be implemented in those countries where asylum seekers get to. Another useful practice is the practice of private sponsorships. So there are people who come from countries that are enduring a severe crisis, and these people could be welcomed by NGOs or by European families. So provided they have all the requirements needed, they can reconnect with their families of origin. So family reunions play a vital role as well as sponsorships. We think that these tools can help immigrants integrate successfully. If you are a family of immigrants living in Europe, you know what the best way is in order to help other foreign families integrate. We are also asking for a change in the Dublin Treaty. We know that this treaty is problematic, especially to some migrants. I would like to recall a movement which is very important in Italy and all over Europe. When the Afghan crisis broke out in August, so when the US troops decided to leave Afghanistan, a movement, a supportive movement of people was set up. We want this movement to be effective. We do not only want to welcome people escaping from Afghanistan. I know there is a representative from the US here. And I know that the US has worked really hard in order to promote the evacuation of Afghan people from their country. And I know that a lot of people are still stuck there. Together with the Home Affairs Minister, we are trying to find a way in order to promote evacuation and humanitarian corridors in order for Afghan people living in Pakistan or in Iran, or those people who are staying close to the border with such countries in order to get a document to leave their countries. Well, we would like humanitarian corridors to be available for them. The system is there, and we are signing an agreement with an evangelical community in order for this practice to be a fact. So the main problem is the legal framework. The legal framework is not there. Finally, Europe has not recognized yet that there is a demographic crisis. I'm thinking of Italy. I know this country very well, but I know it's not the only one in Europe. So I know that there are many job opportunities, and I know that the recovery fund financed by the European Union allows for creating new jobs. But the problem is that there are no workers available. In Italy, there is a lack of farmers. There is a lack of nurses. There is a lack of caregivers. There is a lack of labor in the hospitality industry. So what are European countries waiting for? Why don't they work on a legal framework in order for migrant people to get a visa to move here and to work here? We know that they need to work. So back to my first question. Everything started from a moral imperative. How can we avoid people dying at sea? Well, starting from there and starting from our prayer, because the first thing we did was to pray for people dying at sea. They are not entitled to a tomb yet. So we first prayed for them, and then thanks to this prayer and thanks to the relationship we have with other communities, we developed the initiative I have been talking about. We have saved 3,600 people so far. But as you know, if you only save one life, you save the whole world. So every human life is a world. So allow me to say that such humanitarian corridors have saved 3,600 worlds so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Impagliazzo, for the detailed description of the best practice of the humanitarian corridors. I think that the idea to offer a set of instruments to manage global migration is an essential strategy. I don't think that anybody can claim to have the single recipe to solve the problem of the global migration. We need a complexity of complementary ways to adopt the terminology of European Commission, and I think that humanitarian corridors, resettlements, private sponsorship express this complexity, and this can be a viable strategy. Furthermore, I absolutely want to stress what Professor Impagliazzo mentioned about the fact that humanitarian corridors is not just a way to enter EU or Italy, but it is a strategy of integration. Because thanks to the humanitarian corridors, we have been able to activate the moral energy of the Italian and European civil society. This social activation is a very important process that we want to implement and to celebrate, because I think that it is a way also to celebrate the power of our tradition and our democracies.
Thank you, Professor. I think it's important to recall that the roles of the NGOs are many. So it is the service implementation that we've heard about a bit today, giving the direct needs of these most vulnerable people. But it is also the advocacy around these corridors, these humanitarian corridors. And there's a third role we find ourselves in as well, in the corridors of power. And it's bearing witness. We do this, with the government in the United States, as well as our partner offices at the parliamentary level across Europe and other places, where we're bearing witness to the testimony that we just heard of those who cannot raise their voices about what's happening in the tragedies at sea, for example. I've seen those graveyards in Lesvos where the life jackets at the inflatable rafts are, and you see also the way that the traffickers and others take advantage of these most vulnerable people by offering them materials that are not even safe-proof. And we've heard those stories, if you open these life jackets, they're not even inflatable devices inside, right? So they're also contributing to this crime. But it's not just tragedy at sea. There's also obviously tragedy across land as well. And I would like to invite our next speaker, who is a good dear friend of mine, who's going to speak about some of the crisis in Latin America. We have these corridors of people traversing across very dangerous terrains, and again with very dangerous traffickers. We had, as part of the Interfaith G20, again, I invited you to take a look at the website, but we have a series of webinars throughout the year, so this is not your only opportunity to hear in person at this event in Bologna, but around World Refugee Day a couple of months ago, we actually focused on the Caribbean, Latin America, and Elias, and I know that I'm not going to pronounce your name well, so he's not going to make me. Highlighted what is going on in that region. Many don't know that the Venezuelan crisis is actually the second largest migration of people in the world right now. So please, Elias.
Thank you very much, Cristina. First, thank you very much to you and the working group on refugees of the Interfaith G20 to invite me to be here and to share some remarks about the situation in Latin America, especially the crisis of refugees, migrants from Venezuela. Like you explained it, we are talking about the second crisis of refugee and migrants in the world, which could be seen become the largest in the world. I am sure everyone has heard about it, but I sense that it doesn't receive the same concern from other crises of refugees and migrants. Perhaps because it's in Latin America and the Caribbean, a region of the world that is less strategic than the Middle East or South Asia. Last week, the Regional Interagency Coordination Platform for Refugees and Migrants, the UN platform that coordinates care for migrants and refugees from Venezuela, has confirmed that more than 6 million people have left the country in recent years. The coordination platform, Religions for Peace, is member of this coordination platform, estimate that more than 5 million of these Venezuelan people remain in Latin America and Caribbean countries. Only in Colombia, the UN has registered 2.1 million migrants, while Peru is around 1 million, and Chile and Ecuador exceed 450,000 people. Religion for Peace has a long-standing commitment of multi-religious cooperation to promote inclusion of refugees and migrants in all society, dating back to 1970. Last year, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and Religion for Peace established the Multi-Religious Council of Leaders. It comprises more than 20 religious leaders representing the diverse faith tradition of the world, committed to work together to address the root cause of forced displacement and help those forced to flee by promoting peace building, conflict prevention, and social cohesion. Religion for Peace in Latin America and the Caribbean is helping the situation of refugees and migrants from Venezuela, like I explained. An important example are the Interreligious Committee for Refugees and Migrants in Peru. It was recognized like a best practice by the last Global Refugees Forum, and also the Interreligious Roundtable for Solidarity with Migrants in Cali, Colombia. Refugees were the first community affected by the pandemic, and they almost immediately lost their informal jobs and began to suffer from anger and eviction from them, their rentals homes. International organizations such the UN Agency for Refugees and the International Organization for Migration recognize the difference that faith-based organizations are making in this crisis in Venezuela. At critical junctures where government and large organizations are slower to act, religious actors have the ability to actively help and meet immediate needs on the ground, and in addition, play a crucial role in public policy, integration, and development. Interreligious cooperation has facilitated the integration of community networks of shelters for refugees and migrants that that deliver hot meals and sometimes also lodging in places of transit and destination. These shelters also help refugee and migrants' children without internet to study virtually due to the pandemic. Catholic and evangelical shelters receive support from other faith communities, such as Mormons and Jewish, and also from the multi-religious humanitarian fund of Religion for Peace. The help of UN agencies working together with Religion for Peace is also essential for these shelters. COVID-19 has subjected the refugees and migrants from Venezuela to increased violence. Every risk that we're already facing has been exacerbated by the pandemic. Xenophobia is rising, gender-based violence has increased. Border closures and controls have increased legal and practical complexities. Access to documentation is the first critical step to promote inclusion of these populations. Religion for Peace is cooperating with government and international organizations to guide the refugees and migrants from Venezuela with immigration advice. In the midst of the crisis of the pandemic, refugees and migrants from Venezuela face multiple cases of xenophobia and discrimination that concern religious communities because they can grow and poison the environment for their integration in countries of transit and destination. Therefore, Religion for Peace is organizing a special conference in partnership also with Islamic Relief US about the role of religious communities in fight against xenophobia and discrimination against refugees and migrants in Latin America and the Caribbean in next November. We can see the powerful results when religious organizations, religious communities unite and collaborate with each other and with international organizations to help refugees and migrants from Venezuela. We hope that the recommendation of this forum will consider the urgency of greater aid for interreligious cooperation for the response to the crisis of refugees and migrants from Venezuela that could become the largest in the world next year.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. I think that the suggestion of a stronger interfaith cooperation to face this crisis that will grow up is really a challenge you put on this table, and I think that we have to take very seriously this idea. We heard about an ecumenical cooperation, but you are raising another issue. So you are putting another challenge. So to transform, to go beyond ecumenism and to create interfaith networks to work on this issue. I think that we have so distinctive representatives of different communities of faith that can make this point very clear in their constituencies. I think that, again, this is a recommendation I think we have to take very seriously. Thank you. And unfortunately, we don't have another speaker that was in the schedule, but at this point I have the special pleasure to invite Prefetto Michele Di Bari, who is the head of the Civil Liberties and Immigration Department of the Ministry of Interiors of the Italian Republic. This is a formal presentation. If I may, I would like to introduce Prefetto Di Bari as a very good friend, and I would say a partner that I want to recognize for this ability to listen. Sometimes we are counterparts, so to say. He represents the institutions, we are the voice of the civil society, but he is very capable to listen and to act, and I want to thank him for his capacity to offer an interpretation of our laws based on the constitutional values, of course, but on the central element of the human rights too. So thank you very much, Prefetto Di Bari, è un piacere averti qui con noi.
Buona giornata a tutti.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. I am between friends, and I would like to start from the last point mentioned by Professor Naso. In other words, from the legal role of the Home Affairs Department and Ministry. We know that immigration, civil liberties are a complex issue. Today, the Home Affairs Minister plays a vital role. And why? Because all the contributions made today at a national and international level, all the contributions made by all the speakers focus on specific issues like the rights of refugees. So what can we do from a legal point of view in order for refugees to have their human rights respected? So what can we do in order for these people to have a shelter all over the world? let's not forget that every action, what we do, should comply with a legal framework. Our Constitution, and we strongly believe in that, our Constitution is one of the most beautiful constitutions in the world because it goes beyond the concept of human beings. So it's something even more spiritual, let's say. The theme covered today invites us to make quite a large amount of reflections. The Roman Catholic Church and other churches have a juridical and institutional role to play. Today, we are ready to discuss, to cooperate with them, and as Professor Impagliazzo Enazo said, we believe in a cooperation between private and public bodies. So we are firmly convinced that we can cooperate with churches. I am honored to be in charge of a department that focuses on the freedom of belief and religion. The freedom of religion is one of the most important guarantees of our Italian constitution. It's about the intimate choice made by every human being. It's about the freedom of thought and expression. Religious freedom is a litmus test compared to other freedoms. And if the freedom of religion is not guaranteed, well, in that case, a government or a state can't be considered as a democratic one. So what's the daily challenges the immigration department tackles every day? What do we do in order to protect such freedoms? The pandemic has taught us something. The exercise of your faith or the freedom of religion during a pandemic means that you can create new systems in order for you to express your freedom of religion. In Article 19 of our Constitution, you can read that everybody has the right to the freedom of religion. So you can pray with other people, you can pray alone, etc. So the government recognizes the institutional role of faith, and the church is an independent body. It's a sovereign body. The Article 7 of our Constitution is about the Roman Catholic Church, whereas the Article 8 is about religions more in general. And the Article 8 states that every religion is free in front of the government. So if you comply with these two articles, it means that every day you need to work hard in order for these two pillars to exist. And the foundations of such pillars are the dialogue with churches and communities more in general. We're doing that on a daily basis. This is the only way to lay the foundations of a system that pays attention to everybody. And according to our Constitution, we are all the same, and everybody has the chance and the right to have access to faith in a legal way. So the administration recognizes the legal entity of religions and religious weddings are recognized from a civil point of view, and even priests or religious people are allowed to go to prisons. As you can see, there are many ideas comprised in our constitution. As you can see, every part of the constitution, every religion deserves attention. So the freedom of religion is a fundamental right of every person. So this is a constantly evolving context. 50 years ago, such a theme had a specific political color, let's say, and today it's a sort of a rainbow. The matter of refugees contributes to a political discussion. That's why it's very important for constitution to recognize them and provide them with a legal framework. At a national level, you can see a set of religions, and religions come with many different characteristics, and they draw much attention. The minister builds a relationship with the different communities of faith, and the minister tries to find a shared solution to problems. It's very important to get to know each other. It's important for institutions to know the different religious communities, and nowadays there are many initiatives involving the Muslim world. Together with the Muslim world, we started an initiative that led to the National Agreement for Italian Islam, and we organized meetings with young Muslim people. We have also recognized such communities as legal bodies, legal entities, and it's very important for them to respect the Italian juridical system. They have to comply with the Italian law. They have to comply with the protection of human rights and the freedom of worship. The same has happened with the Jewish community. Every day, the Home Affairs Minister promotes many initiatives in an Italian city in order to remember all the Jewish people died in the 40s. In the last years, we have also added a specific training course for teachers and students of secondary schools. The minister pays great attention to other communities of faith as well. The aim is to provide them with the same rights described by the Constitution. At the moment, we are trying to recognize the Sikh communities, and we have involved other governmental bodies in order for them to recognize other religious communities. At the moment, we are waiting for a law that transposes the agreement signed with the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church has been recognized as a religious community, and we are working with the Roma Orthodox Church in order to recognize it as a religious community. And the same is happening with the evangelical community. Civic education is fundamental for these communities. it addresses those religious communities that haven't signed an agreement with the government yet. And as you know, there are more and more migrants that are giving a different color to the world. Together with universities, we have organized different courses to meet the needs of the different religious communities. Besides providing such communities with a legal and juridical framework, it's also very important to put such words into practice. And I'm referring to the activities promoted by religious communities. In this case, religious communities enrich the world of religion, and they also enrich the heritage of our communities. Supportiveness is something we really need to have. And I'm not referring to confessions but if you think of the word fraternitas, this word goes beyond mutual understanding. Human beings play a vital role when you take action in order to protect human dignity. Supportiveness is not only part of one of the values that act as a foundation of our juridical system, and I'm referring to the lay supportiveness. For believers, it's an example of charis. So it's something that encourages people to do something to meet other people's needs. Religious communities are social communities mentioned by the Article 2 of our Constitution. They are places where human personality is developed. As the Constitutional Court said, having a secular government in Italy is fundamental, and this does not mean that the government does not care for other religions or the government goes against religion. It's the opposite. It means that the Italian government pays great attention to every religion. We live in a context where every religion is as important as any other one, and they are all part of a set of values established by the juridical system. I would like to recall what has happened recently because of COVID-19. We need to find a balance between constitutional rights and extraordinary needs of the healthcare system. In Italy, unlike other countries, and Professor Naso knows what I mean, in Italy, choosing a memorandum of understanding in order for believers to take part in masses, and we signed this agreement together with the representatives of other religions. And maybe those religious communities have not found an agreement with the Italian government yet, but such experience was unique in Italy, and it guaranteed the freedom of worship in Italy. So believers could continue to worship their God, and at the same time, their health was protected. There was not just one memorandum of understanding or one protocol. There were many protocols, and the aim was to meet the needs of every confession. The most important thing was to sign an agreement as far as the relationship with religious communities is concerned. So different and unilateral choices made by other public bodies. other public bodies put some restrictions on religion and the freedom of worship. And in those cases, courts punished them. So they confirmed that the choice made by the Italian government was the best one. I know that I have to stay within my allotted time, so this juridical system focuses on another aspect I would like to mention. The activities of religious communities are very important, and their aim is to help people who are in need, like weak people or poorer people. So they guarantee welfare policies to these people. And the Constitution supports such activities. And I would like to recall what was said about humanitarian corridors. They are a new way to help refugees. Are they the only tool to help them? Maybe, who knows? But the strength of humanitarian corridors, the strength of the evacuation, the strength of such new ways, new legal ways, is linked to one country, Italy, but such strength can't be associated with one country only. We know that the number of refugees is constantly increasing. That's why we need European corridors. And you need to have access to European corridors through governments and through religious communities. In Italy, they decided to help quite a large amount of people, depending on the different needs we can meet. So in Europe, I think we could help more and more people. What did the ancients teach us? When Rome was built, Rome built large walls for cities. So the people who came to Rome could consider Rome as a holy place. And this is what allowed Rome to live forever. Sparta and Athens were much more equipped than Rome, but they were very different from Rome, and the welcoming concept was not the same. That's why they didn't live as long as Rome. So the past can teach us quite a lot. But today's lesson, if you also consider the experience we're living, tells us that you can activate humanitarian corridors, you can protect the refugees' rights, but the most important thing is that you also need to integrate those people in a quick way. You need to do that promptly. You need to understand the culture of those people in order to integrate them. So we need to enlarge the number of rights described by our constitution. So if you get to Italy, you need to believe in community. Such concept is well described in our constitution. And I think this is the most important agreement you can sign. Mario Draghi said something beautiful, in my opinion. He said, if we do not activate a mechanism of integration which is strong enough, the people we welcome could become our enemies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prefetto Di Bari, for this very comprehensive and rich presentation. You raised so many topics and issues that is impossible to remind all of them, but I would like to stress a couple of sentences. One, the Italian model of a church state, or if you prefer, confession and state relations. It's a model of separation, but it is a dynamic separation because, as the Prefetto said, there is a permanent dialogue between the two bodies. The community of faith and the state are separated, but at the same time, they are integrated in a common platform of permanent dialogue. Number two, the very important challenge for Italy of a new phenomenon, a new religious pluralism. 50 years ago, the pluralistic dimension of our country was very limited. Today, we have millions of people living in our countries who don't belong to the majority church, the Catholic Church. This is a very important news that I think the political decision makers have to take in account. And finally, I think that the 2 or 3 examples he mentions are very, very crucial. Example number 1, the dialogue with Islamic communities. This is incredibly important, I would like to say also in terms of security. I think that to dialogue with this community is an investment on security for the future. Second example, the reaction to COVID and how to adopt the communities of faith as terminals to produce reaction and protection from COVID-19. Number 3, of course, migration. So this is the Italian experience, and thank you, Prefetto, for summarizing what we have been doing in the last years. So,
I'd like to make one comment as well, and then we're going to open the floor. I think while we would all agree that legal frameworks and putting in place security is the ideal, that we are witnessing with all of these refugee crises, that many of these legal frameworks are taking far too long. It is, what contributed, obviously, to the disorderly evacuation of Afghanistan, as just one example. But I think what we've lost in this conversation today that I hope we will take away is coming back to the individual and the person. We've talked a lot about mass migration and groups of people moving across bodies of water and bodies of land. And I think what we have lost in here is that individual who, out of despair and desperation, that is the reason that they are leaving their home country. And when they are arriving in these places where these legal frameworks are taking far too long, Lesvos being just one example where we're providing legal aid service, as I mentioned earlier. We've had cases of, recently, a woman who actually self-immolated. She set her tent on fire with her children inside because the process was taking too long and she was giving up hope. Now, fortunately, they were able to save her, and we've put in place now many more programs, a lot of the NGOs that are trauma-based and psychosocial, realizing that, we were talking about earlier the immediate needs of people, the shelter, the food, but we cannot forget the trauma-informed issues and the mental health as well. So I just don't want us to lose in this conversation of legal frameworks and security that these are people we are talking about.
Thank you, Bettina, for this additional point that is very important in terms of, I would say, methodology of strategy. I think that we have a few minutes for a couple of probably 3, but probably 2 questions or very, very short remarks. As I told, we have to close our session a few minutes after 4:30. So please, if there are questions, this is the time. Please, questions or? Sorry, we can't hear.
How important would you say it is for integration to work both ways?
Yes.
Who are you addressing that to? One of the speakers?
I would like to hear all your thoughts, but if not, then
I have a temptation. I'm sorry. Let me, the political scientist.
The professor.
Absolutely. The language of integration is a double way. Our document, the basic document we adopted also in Italy, but in Europe, is the basic principle of integration 204. And from the very beginning, it is very clear and stressed that integration is a two-way process, challenging both the immigrants and the national communities. So in this sense, integration will change our society. In this sense, I strongly stress the difference between integration and assimilation. I know that other European countries adopted a different or peculiar interpretation of this principle, France namely, Belgium in some sense. I think that other European countries, and for sure Italy, really tried to develop a concept of integration based on the principle of mutuality.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Tanya. I'm from the Interfaith Forum, the youth one, with my colleague Hina. And I was a student of Dr. Elil Hindi in Lebanon at the Notre Dame University. So I have a short remark or question, let's say remark better. So we're talking about how interfaith dialogue can help migrants and refugees around the world. And in Lebanon, I think that it's important that religious institutions also kinds of refugees and migrants, not only from their own religion. So for example, I'm Christian from Lebanon, and I see like for the Syrian refugees or the Iraqi refugees, churches focus a lot on just helping refugees from the Christian faith. They're like, okay, we don't want to help refugees from other religions. And I think that it's important that the religious leaders also say that they should not discriminate with the religion of the refugees. So that's my only comment and something to think about. So yeah, thank you.
Again, I'm sorry, I try to offer an answer on behalf of my partners. The humanitarian corridors started for a Christian action. I think that at least 88% of our beneficiaries are not Christians at all. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly the spirit, because we are not speaking of Christian refugees. And we strongly confront with some others entities who want to protect the community only. No, humanitarian rights are for everybody and don't have any religious marker. I'm sorry, Marco, to anticipate.
Solo un piccolo esempio.
Allow me to add a tiny little example. When Pope Francis brought some migrants from Lesbos, well, he welcomed 12 first and then 10. All of them were Muslims. A protest triggered on behalf of some, let's say, traditional Catholic representatives because the Pope was hosting Muslim refugees instead of Christian refugees. On that occasion, the core attention was paid to the fact that they were all the documentation ready to move away from their country. So a state of necessity and a legal framework as well. So people dared to, comment on the actions of the Pope himself.
My sense is that not only are we facing the largest crisis, but the causes of the crises have changed from natural causes to man-made causes. And I'm wondering if that's affected, I just don't know, or has that affected how we've responded? Or has that affected issues we have to address with refugees, or sort of their new challenges as a result of these new causes? I'll let the moderators decide who's best suited. Thank you.
I am, please.
Just to comment on that very quickly, I think a major difference is in two kinds. First, those who are seeking refuge because of natural disasters, these are very likely to go back. whereas those who are fleeing for ethnic genocide or religious issues, these are most likely to stay, and this changes the whole way we deal with them in the first place. Second, there's definitely the challenge of the difference of identity that I addressed in my paper or in my presentation. The fact that most of the comers are from a different culture or religion or ethnicity, which poses this challenge and this tension for the diversity and for how we deal with that diversity. And if we don't deal with it in the right way, it would be perceived as a threat and thus will hinder the integration process of the refugees and makes everything much more difficult.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to say that at this point our panel is going to end. On behalf of my colleague, I think that we want to thank you all for the wonderful participation. I think that you have been inspired by the variety of witnesses, and the final conclusion that I would like to offer to the organizers of this wonderful interfaith G20 is the idea that the religious factor is a strong factor of social dynamics and can be oriented to policy of human rights and safeguard of the basic rights of those who are persecuted. This idea is very strong, and we do hope can be a real policy, can be transformed in a very practical policy at the political level of the G20. And enjoy Bologna.